If you abuse the delicate fight or flight mechanisms and produce too much cortisol in a chronic manner, that's when you... Oh, here we go. Another in the long series of overtraining symptoms, warning signs, and ways to take corrective action. This content is inspired by the incredibly comprehensive look at overtraining that you will absorb in the Primal Fitness Expert Certification course. So please visit primalhealthcoach.com. B.rad has a discount for you, and you can learn all about it and have this wonderful fitness experience where we cover all aspects of living a total fitness lifestyle, not just workout stuff and how many squats and curls to do in the gym, but the coverage is extensive. I mentioned the overtraining. We have things like how to make a more dynamic workday, stretches and dynamic stretches, drills, technique drills, of course, the bread and butter stuff that you usually experience in a fitness certification course, like how to work out in the gym and how to use proper technique for all the important lifts and resistance exercises we have. There's an entire segment on sprinting, the best return on investment of any exercise you can get. And it's all in this Primal Fitness Expert Certification course with a deep, deep, deep dive into overtraining. And I'm just giving you these great tidbits on the ongoing series of shows. So we're going to get into another nice group here, starting with elevated cortisol levels. So we hear about cortisol now. Thankfully, I didn't even know what it was 25 years ago, 30 years ago, when I first plunged into extreme overtraining and had to get books at the library and learn about the stress response and how cortisol is pumped into the bloodstream and it makes you feel great and has all these immediate performance advantages. But if you abuse the delicate fight or flight mechanisms and produce too much cortisol in a chronic manner, that's when you crash and burn. But generally, we emphasize the crash and burn aspects of chronic overproduction of cortisol without acknowledging sufficiently that cortisol is a key stress hormone that gets us up and into our busy day and performing magnificent athletic feats and also feats of cognitive performance, focus, concentration, motivation. So healthy cortisol is essential for healthy living. Jay Feldman in our last podcast says, yeah, guess what? If you don't have stress hormones, you're dead, literally. So we need to have healthy cortisol levels. And in a healthy, stressed, balanced subject, cortisol levels actually appropriately spike in the morning. That's one of the things that enables us to transition from a restful sleep into an alert and energized morning. And you can probably reference being awakened from a deep sleep where you feel groggy, you feel tired, your body feels heavy. And then when you awaken on one of the nice days, when you awaken refreshed and energized, that's because of the spike in cortisol, serotonin, the drop in adenosine, all these complex hormonal factors that are occurring thanks to proper alignment with our circadian rhythm, where we actually do awaken near sunrise, feeling refreshed and energized. And on the flip side, thanks to an appropriate melatonin release in the evening hours, we transition gracefully to feel more tired, more sleepy, more sluggish, and then we put our head down to the pillow and have a good night's sleep. So when we have these stress hormones in balance, everything's working nicely. Cortisol peaks in the morning, quickly rising by 50% in the first 30 minutes after waking up to enable an energetic day. Then what happens with cortisol is it declines gradually over the course of the day, reaching a desirable low around bedtime. Because what's happening in the evening after it gets dark in our environment, and I speak that way because it's not when the sun sets, that's how our circadian rhythm operated for 2 million years. And only recently, since Thomas Edison and Steve Jobs and Joe Netflix invented their devices and technology to keep us light after it gets dark, it's when we make it dark in our environment is when the hormonal processes really kick into gear. So around bedtime, parasympathetic rest and digest functions start to predominate and orchestrate that graceful transition into a good night's sleep. If and only if you've kept your environment dark and done wind down activities rather than blasting your eyeballs with artificial light from the screen, thereby suppressing melatonin and spiking cortisol inappropriately in the evening. Furthermore, when you're in this a temporary overreaching state headed toward overtraining, cortisol levels can remain undesirably high throughout the day. This especially features a wired evening where you get a second wind around bedtime instead of a progressive, graceful, natural, beautiful increase in sleepiness, mellowness, and sluggishness. So this is trouble. Getting a second wind and answering more emails to clear your inbox between 10 and 11 p.m. is not a sign of productivity. It's a sign of dysregulated circadian rhythm that you are going to pay the price for later. And hard training fitness enthusiasts can get into these patterns, as well as workaholics and people that run around at a hectic pace all day, fail to proper nourish themselves or sit down for quiet, relaxing, energizing meals. But when you get that cortisol dysregulation in the evening, that's a huge symptom. We want to feel tired, sluggish, and have our brain slowly start to take staircases down to where we're not alert and energized and banging through text messages and emails when our brain should be slowing down. So how can you tell if you have elevated cortisol levels? That evening second wind is a telltale sign. And you can also take what's called a salivary cortisol test. You don't want to rely on a single snapshot blood test, although they can test cortisol levels in the blood. It really means nothing because whatever time of day that was, like I said, cortisol levels rise 50% in the first 30 minutes after waking. So it's not one of those blood results where your physician or your functional medicine expert can say, well, your cortisol is 38 and that's too high because you're overstressed. No, I want a really high cortisol level during an intense workout, or I want to wake up and feel alert and energized. So what we want to do with this salivary test is you are directed to provide a saliva sample at several junctures during the day. I think it's like 5 samples. So of course, you're going to take one upon awakening. You're going to look for that spike later, and then you're going to take an evening salivary cortisol test, and then they send you back the result. And what you see is a graph, like a bell-shaped curve or what have you, where you see the appropriate spike. And so we have like a healthy cortisol bell-shaped curved graph, and then you plot that against your cortisol levels that appear from the salivary cortisol test. And if you see that spike in the evening, that's when we got to do some digging and do some recalibrating with busy, hectic, stressful life. The next one, which is also a huge and very reliable warning sign of impending overtraining and burnout, is digestive disturbances. Because when you chronically overproduce stress hormones, you suppress both immune function and digestive function. Your digestive system does not work well under chronic stress, and you are going to get symptoms like cramps, bloating, inflammation, and transient abdominal pain during and after meals because your digestive system is not calm and relaxed. That's why it's so important to sit down for meal times in a really nice, calm, relaxing environment. My friend is taken to eating meals by candlelight in a dark room, and it's pretty interesting. I've never seen anyone go that deep in the home environment, but it serves to calm things down. That's why the finest dining is at low light levels rather than blasting background music and all the crap they do at the chain restaurants to make it anything but a relaxing experience. So meal times, you want to get into that parasympathetic state. That's why it's called rest and digest. And if you have difficulty accessing parasympathetic and you're sympathetic dominant, your digestive system is going to get hammered by a routine meal. And so before we go down these rabbit holes and pay for expensive tests to find that you're allergic to cashews, but not almonds, and you're allergic to spinach, but not kale, I know those efforts are well-intentioned, but first we want to look at the big picture of your stress-rest balance so that you have a fighting chance to absorb your nutrients optimally. So that's a big one: digestive disturbances, elevated cortisol levels. And then the last one I'll cover in this little episode are symptoms of a dysregulated menstrual cycle. And this can include increased severity of premenstrual syndrome symptoms, irregular cycles, or in the most extreme example, and I mention this example a lot because it's the quintessential example of an overly stressful lifestyle and overtraining is amenorrhea. That's the loss of menstruation due to inappropriate training load. And this is a common condition among really highly trained female athletes whose body fat percentage drops under that healthy minimum, to the extent that they cease menstruation, they are no longer fit for reproduction. Most female athletes training for the nationals or the worlds or the Olympics are not really concerned with their fertility, but we have to, again, reflect on the big picture that this is the female's quintessential biological drive, as is the male's. And the next show is going to be all about libido for both males and females. But when you have irregular menstrual cycle or you cease menstruation, that is the most prominent sledgehammer sign over your head that something is out of balance. Because when you're messing with your primary biological drive, your primary biological purpose for existing as an organism, not that you, whether we're not talking about whether you want to have 1 kid, 3 kids, 4, or 0. It has nothing to do with it. It's your biological imperative to be fit for reproduction at all times. And when you trash that, that means you are extremely out of balance with your stress-rest balance. And unfortunately for females, where they get a competitive advantage, the lighter they are. So clearly, a distance runner who's training for the marathon wants to have absolute bare minimum body fat, but we have to tiptoe on that fine line to not experience amenorrhea, because then we're going to have a loss of bone density and all kinds of hormonal and mineral problems. There was a good article on the internet with the great American runner, I believe she's 10K national record holder, Elise Cranny, former Stanford runner, now professional. And she talked openly. Her coach was also quoted in the article, where she was training too hard and trying to shave off, an extra pound or two, obviously competing at the elite level where this stuff matters tremendously. And she plunged into a cycle of overtraining, injury, and then recurring injuries, stress fractures directly attributed to the amenorrhea condition. She righted it, came back, got to continue to train at her healthy weight rather than an unhealthy lower weight, and was able to, salvage a season and perform at a high level again. So, boy, especially female athletes getting down into the low body fat, watch out and realize that you're tiptoeing on a fine line, like any athlete who's on that red line. Okay, that's a nice little chunk of important telltale symptoms and warning signs of overreaching, overtraining. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and go check out that Primal Fitness Expert Certification course. More coming. Stay tuned.